Tell me if this has ever happened to you before. You learn a word and you forget it after a week. How do you fix that? How do we break the cycle of relearning and remember the words that we learned for longer? Maybe even forever?
I can tell you my problems, meditating my silence. But I keep pushing my pen and rotating my stylus.
Hi, my name's Elysse daVega. I've studied over 10 languages, and you might be wondering how I remember all those goddamn words. Today, I want to tell you guys how I make vocabulary stick in any language. It's just 5 tips, but these 5 methods have made such a world of difference in my language learning. I forgot to ask, how are you doing today? Good? I'm glad. Good. Not good? I'm sorry. Whether you're good, bad, somewhere in between, we still gotta make this video, so let's dive right in. So the first piece of advice I have for you, a person wanting to improve in vocabulary, is to study vocabulary in context always. This is like this is the first commandment of learning vocabulary. This is something you can do even from a beginner stage. So studying in context just means always studying the word in the context of a phrase or a sentence, not just like a solitary word hanging out in a vacuum. So when I make flashcards in French, for example, if the word is penser, for example, to think, I'm not just gonna write penser in its unconjugated infinitive form. I'm gonna put maybe a sentence like qu'est-ce que tu penses? What do you think? This serves me so much more and is so much more useful than just like I said, like a solitary word hanging out in a vacuum. It's in context. Where's my kitty? It's real, it's in context, it's applied, and it's something that you're gonna use a ton in conversation. If you learn words in the phrases and situations which they're most likely to be used in, or at least some of them, when you end up in these situations in real life, you can respond quicker because, the gears aren't turning while you conjugate a verb, the gears in your brain aren't turning while you try to decline this noun or something like that. It's just much easier to apply it and recall it. Moving on, my next piece of advice is just called see it and hear it. So on this one, I'm not really talking about when you're practicing vocabulary, but more when you first learn it. I think that when you first encounter a word through like a TV show or a podcast or a movie or something like that, if you're seeing the word when you hear it, it sticks so much better from that point on. So like instead of just listening to a podcast, listen to it while you read a transcript. There's so many language learning podcasts that offer transcripts nowadays. Instead of just watching a video or a movie, watch it with subtitles. Even if it's just the crappy YouTube auto-generated subtitles, it's something, okay? Aside from YouTube, there's Netflix. They always have subtitles in a ton of languages. If you want to use Language Reactor, you can have double subtitles. But real quick, if we're talking subtitles, I have to recommend LingoPie. LingoPie is basically just like a subscription-based on-demand streaming service specifically for language learners. My favorite thing about LingoPie is their interactive subtitles. So you can have just subtitles in one language, you can have them in 2 languages at a time, or you can do what's called like the mashup option where it'll kind of mix them. And if you don't know a word while you're watching, all you have to do is click on it and it'll give you the definition and it'll save it automatically into a flashcard deck for you, like for that specific show or movie or whatever you're watching. And every time you click on 5 words, like after 5 words, it'll auto-generate a pop quiz for you so that you can check your comprehension while you're viewing. And I think that's so cool because a lot of the times when we consume content, it's always like we watch it and then we practice it after. But this is like a lot more, I guess, like intertwined approach. So if you want to try out LingoPie, I will leave a link down in the description. You can get a 7-day trial completely for free. Tell them I sent you. Okay, so this next tip, I would really only recommend it to people who have reached B2 or an equivalent level in their target languages. It's kind of like advanced. Study in the language. This means not just translating the target language into your native or your reference language all the time, but trying to immerse yourself fully. This can be applied in a ton of ways, but one way that I apply this is through flashcards. So like when I make my flashcards in French, I don't put it like French to English, it's just French to French. This way you have to kind of explain the word with words that you already know. Like you're learning a ton of synonyms, you're building a network of vocabulary, like a word net, everything kind of just starts to connect together. So in my French flashcards, it'll say like cacher, to hide, and then dissimuler, which is another word pretty much for cacher. Another way to apply this is by writing your notes completely in your target language. So instead of like writing out the explanations in your native language or your reference language, like I said, just do it all in your target language. Yet another way, you could, if you're using like an app like Buzu or Duolingo, put the app on your phone or the desktop version in your target language. So like you can do this from the settings a lot of the time. If you go to like interface language, or a lot of times if you change the language of your device in general, it'll automatically switch over, which is very cool. Studying 100% in your target language is so beneficial for so many reasons. It's a great way to immerse by yourself. And because you're not just learning the concept, you're also learning how to explain the concept. You're learning it from both sides, back and forth. You know, you're like a double agent. You're the student and the teacher. That's dope. So my next tip is to produce the word closer to your first encounter with the word. I really think that the sooner you have output with the word, the sooner you produce the word, the better you're going to remember it in the long run. That's just my impression from like my personal experience. Here's some ways that you can apply this. So let's say when you're making a vocabulary list, a lot of the times what we do, we just write down the vocab word and then we write down the translation, like immediately. But what I do, let's say I'm watching an episode of TV in French, because I have been watching a lot of TV in French recently. So what I do is I write down the words, but I don't write down like a translation or an equivalent word immediately. I just write down the word that I want. I finish my list, I finish the episode, and then at the end I go through and add like all the equivalents or all the translations. It's kind of like the first test that I give myself to see like, okay, can I remember these words that I learned 45 minutes ago? You know, it's the first chance to produce it. And while we're talking about vocabulary lists, another way to practice new vocabulary sooner is just by reading them out loud after you write them down. You know, it's your first chance to practice pronunciation of these words. You can compare your pronunciation to native speakers on Forvo, which is like an online pronunciation dictionary. You could also take these words and write sentences with them and maybe get corrections. You could put them in a paragraph, try to use as many of them in a paragraph as you can. So yeah, when you're done collecting your words, maybe take a little break, 20 to 30 minutes, but come back to them and just kind of try them out in different ways and get your first go around with the words. Okay, this is my last and final tip to you, okay, grasshopper? Active recall versus passive recall. What does this mean? This sounds so scientific, so scary. Elysse, what is that? It's so simple. It literally just means prompting yourself in your target language versus prompting yourself in your native language or your reference language. In this case, I'm talking mostly about flashcards, but you can apply this in a lot of different ways. So like, for example, with my flashcards, when I'm doing French flashcards, if they have English on one side, which I don't really do that anymore, but back in the day, I would start with the English side and then go to the French side, because it's so much easier to like see a word in your target language and be like, oh, I remember that, and match it to an idea in your native language, than it is to see the word in your native language first and have to come up with the word in your target language. It's the difference between like recognizing and actually producing the word, okay? This is a bigger challenge, and I feel like if you're able to recall something in a more difficult context and do that over and over, it'll stick with you for longer. Like, I've worked as a translator before, and I always found it a lot harder to translate stuff from my native language, English, into a different language than vice versa. So start doing that. Give yourself that challenge. I believe in you. Believe in yourself. Push yourself, never give up. What am I doing? And that is it, my friends. Those are my 5 pieces of advice for you to remember words in your languages for longer. So thank you for watching this video. I'll see you next time. If you want to follow me on social media, it is just Elysse daVega on everything. How simple is that? You have no reason not to follow me now, okay? Say goodbye to my cat. That's not my cat, it's just, I just looked up cute kitten. I wanted something nice for the background, okay? See you next time, bye.